We're very, very grateful to have you here. My name is Randy Kluver. I'm the Dean of the School of Global Studies and Partnerships. And this year is a particularly special year for us. This is the 20th anniversary of the founding of the School of International Studies, which occurred on April 1st, 1999. And so we celebrated our 20th anniversary just a couple of days ago, and we're grateful that our speaker was able to be a part of that, who's one of our own graduates, but I'll leave that to Dr. Fullerton. So I just want to welcome you to tonight's event. I want to also call your attention to the final Global Briefing Speakers series of the year, which will happen on Tuesday, April 23rd. You might have seen this flyer. We'll be having Michael Eklund will be speaking about the future of global energy. And so we welcome you back at that event as well, also in the West Watkins Center. Finally, I'm going to turn to Dr. Jamie Fullerton, who is the Director of Academic Programs and a professor in the School of Media and Strategic Communication, but also runs all the global the master's program in the School of Global Studies, to introduce our speaker. Dr. Fullerton?
Thank you. Okay. I have so many former students in here, including Blake running the video, so you tell us. Thank you, dear. Good evening. Thank you all for coming this evening. I know this is a busy time at the university. April is always a busy month for everyone, and there's lots of things going on, including doing your final papers and getting ready for graduation and finishing up your theses. And so I really appreciate you being here tonight, but I promise you will be glad you came, because we have an opportunity tonight to hear from another former student of mine, Angelika Arutyunova, and she is going to be talking to us this evening about her wonderful work in global advocacy work. I have a short bio here that I'm going to read to you, and then I'll just tell you a few neat things about her and let her come up. Angelika is an alumna of the OSU School of Global Studies master's program. She is a feminist social justice consultant with experience in various development movements across several regions. She began social work as a youth activist in Uzbekistan. 2 decades later, Angelika has developed a professional career promoting women's and LGBTIQ rights and philanthropy. Her work focuses on consulting and supporting organizations to develop strategies, conduct research, facilitate meetings, and advocate for resourcing movements to improve the lives of women globally. Angelika has worked with the world's largest women's rights foundation, the Global Fund for Women, and the Association for Women's Rights in Development, AWID, which is one of today's top feminist organizations. She conceptualized, developed, and co-authored groundbreaking research on funding trends within AWID's Where is the Money for Women's Rights initiative. This research contributed to a successful advocacy to improve and increase funding for women's rights around the world. Angelika served as AWID's program director for International Feminist Forum in Brazil in 2016. I think I saw you right before you were leaving for that trip, and you were so excited, and I know that it went really well. She also co-founded FRIDA, the only youth-led women's rights fund in the world, which receives almost $1 million in grants each year. When I first met Angelika, she was a college student in the former Soviet Union in Samarkand, Uzbekistan. I remember having her in class. She was breaking all the rules for women in the Central Asian republics, and I think she has continued to do so. And I am so proud of her, and we here at OSU are so proud of her. And thank you very much for coming. Angelika, please.
Thank you all so much. Do you want me to move this out of the way? Can you hear me now? You good? Okay. I don't really do podiums. I'm more of an activist who walks around. And so if you see me moving around, don't get dizzy. So good evening, everyone. It's really an honor to be back here. It's been 17 years. I graduated in 2002, and I'm especially really honored to be here because Maureen Nemechek and Glenn Nemechek are here as well. Those are the people who welcomed me here and supported me to come to the US. And Maureen was the first academic director of this program and really supported me in understanding what it is that I wanted to do with this education. So how many of you are studying development or teaching development? All right, just a handful. So the rest of you, you may want to snooze for the next 5 minutes or so, or the other way around, depending on your interest. What I want to do in the beginning is, because this is the School of International Studies, I wanted to frame my talk from the perspective of development frameworks that we are now currently operating in, and what women's rights and gender equality issues are looking like within those development frameworks. I've done a lot of work at the United Nations level, so I will draw a little bit on that experience. And then I want to talk specifically about what are the current issues that women's rights are experiencing around the world, and what are the responses, how the women are organizing, and what is the current situation in that. So without further ado, most of you may recognize these logos. Yeah? All right, so those are some of the key institutions that do development work globally: United Nations, the World Bank, now it's a group of the banks, and the International Monetary Fund. These institutions have been created in the West and the North, mostly in response to post-war reconciliations and end of the colonial era, recognizing that countries that have gone out of colonial regime are now underperforming in some ways, surprise, and they need some support. And so the money that has been initially extracted from those countries and allowed the West to make a lot of resources has now been put into supporting them to kind of generate a little bit more wealth and develop. So there's a bit of a problematics with that particular development model, which has been challenged over time. And so what I want to also show you is another type of the framework for development that has evolved over the past 50 plus years, and now it's actually starting to become much more prominent, and something for all of you, especially those who are studying development, to keep watching, that may come up much stronger. Anyone knows what this logo is? This is a very important logo for you all to start remembering. This is a South-South cooperation. This is a logo representing the countries that are based outside of the global North, which means the United States and Canada and Western and Northern Europe. This is the countries that are collaborating with one another. So here's the actual name, South-South and Triangular Cooperation for Sustainable Development. These are the countries that have come together and said, we have our own resources, we have our own solutions, we have our own models for development. We do not need North to dictate what it is that we are doing in our countries. We will do it ourselves. And here are a few of the resources that are coming from this part of the world. So all of these institutions together, the New Development Bank, the China Development Bank, Russian Regional Development Bank, Asia Development Bank, and African Development Bank collectively have as much, if not more, resources than the institutions that I showed you earlier. That is important to know in terms of the money, and yes, I do talk a lot about money. It was part of my title, Where is the Money? Because money really does give us a sense of who can make decisions and who can dictate what kind of development and what kind of problematics people will be addressing. So it's important to notice that these institutions have a lot of money right now, and the way that they are investing the money is very, very different from the ones that I showed earlier. All know who these men in suits are? These are the presidents of BRICS: Brazil, China, India, Russia, South Africa. 5 years ago, I was standing in front of the audience of 2,000 people proclaiming that the pendulum of power has shifted to the BRICS. North, forget about it. You are out of the picture. Then the pendulum shifted again when Brazil got through the crisis. And I was on my way to Brazil when Dilma was being impeached. And Zika crisis hit, and I was like, okay. And then South Africa and Russia and China Russia and South Africa at the same time had economic crisis. So there was a little bit of a conundrum with those political and economic conditions in those countries. What's important about this consortia is that they are not in a political agreement about a lot of things. So they have very different value set in terms of the governance, which is also important to remember in comparison to the development model that we have coming from the North, which is based in universality of human rights, in democracy, in liberal democracy, and capitalism as a economic system. These countries have very, very different ideas of all of those things. There is no agreement among them on one political system, on one economic system, on one military system. So it's a very new alliance, not like in the past, which makes it very difficult for people like me to work with them, because then I don't have an international framework to use to advocate for the rights of women. So are you all still with me?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love it.
Okay, okay. So the Asian century. How many of you do know that this century has been proclaimed the Asian century? All right. For the rest of you who don't know, there are a couple of resources that you should read up on. And the Asian century basically means that what's going to happen in this century is that the domination of the West is going to subside and the domination of the East is going to increase in every single aspect of life, from economics to politics to military control. I want to show you then the pictures of just some proof from my own experiences in the past few years. I was attending this conference in January. It's called Raisina Dialogue, a world reorder. It's hosted by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of India every year for the last 4 years now, and a think tank out of Delhi called Observer Research Foundation, the largest think tank in Asia that is completely devoted to developing these new strategies of the international collaborations. And the panel that you see is 5 admirals of the largest navies in the Indo-Pacific. And the conversation was absolutely fascinating. One of the admirals was the Admiral Philip Davidson of the US Navy. He had the weakest presence on that panel in relation to the Indian, Chinese, Japanese, and Russian who were sitting on the same panel. And it was really fascinating how the US is not the one dictating anymore not the Russian, the Australian, not dictating anymore what is happening in Indo-Pacific. It's actually there to just listen and to see what kind of conversation is happening among others. China has been building about 3 to 5 military ships every year for the last 5 years, making its navy stronger than anyone else in the world at this current moment. Japan is really worried about it. So the whole shift on political power is really there. We are witnessing it. So there was actually a very interesting conversation with this professor from China, Wang Weng, at the end of the conference when he said, why are you all so scared of China? You should be excited about China. China is here to help all of you to actually do better. So because there is so much fear around the capitalism versus communism. And it's interesting that China is presenting itself in a very interesting way right now and understanding the power that it's bringing. Yours truly is here on the panel in the same conference talking about Me Too movement and its implications on the global scene. So what's fascinating about this conversation, and I wanted to segue now and what does it all mean for the women's rights, is that these spaces are really not open yet for this type of conversations. And because the people who organized the conference knew I would not show up if I don't have a speaking role, so they created the panel. It was a very heated discussion, and if you notice the difference between the room where the admirals were talking and the room where I'm talking, the size is quite different. So it's a much smaller panel, it's a little bit offbeat, and a time that's not convenient for a lot of people to attend, yet they still have it. So there is an entry point, there is still a little bit that we can start talking about of what is happening in the world of the women's rights and gender equality. And another just reality check in those conversations, you have, do you know who that person is?
Afghan President Hamid Karzai?
Yes, former Afghan President Hamid Karzai. He was there being interviewed by a BBC correspondent, and the question he received that, what about women in Afghanistan to play a role in reconciliation and conflict resolution and sit at the table while these decisions are being made. 10 years ago, Karzai would have said to Americans, we will consider it because this is one of the conditions that women have to be at the table. This January, in this conference, Hamid Karzai's response was, let our culture define what role of women is. So that's a very important distinction. We are right now in the moment of cultural relativity, where universal human rights are not as valid as, is this appropriate for my culture? Then I will do it. And if I decide it's not appropriate for my culture, I will not do it. So dealing with the work in South-South cooperation field, we have to deal with that a lot. Unfortunately, that's also the case for the global spaces that have been created by the North as well. Anyone knows what those things are, the Sustainable Development Goals? I see some nods. Everyone still with me? Yeah? So the Sustainable Development Goals have been adopted by the United Nations 2-3 years ago, and they basically are the agenda towards 2030 to achieve the 17 goals. All of these goals, I don't know if you can all read, I'll just go quickly through them. No poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry, innovation and infrastructure, reduced inequalities, sustainable cities and communities, responsible consumption and production, climate action, life below water, life on land, peace, justice and strong institutions, partnerships for the goals. Where do you think are women and girls in those goals? Goal number 5, right? Yeah, gender equality. The women's rights movement made sure we are everywhere. If you look at the targets for each of these goals and indicators for success for each of these goals, from climate action to life below water to everything here, you will see specific gender-related outcomes, specific gender-related targets and indicators. Because as a women's rights movement globally, we have been working to understand and to explain to the world that depending on your gender and your socialization, you experience conflict differently, you experience different problems differently, and so the addressing of it cannot be gender blind. So every single goal, and I'm very proud to say that we've done really remarkable work on trying to do this. There are targets for the goal number 5, and there are 9 of them, and they're all around different aspects of why women's rights are important. And I kind of want us to talk a little bit about them because they're related very much to the current context of what it is that we're experiencing. So one is the discrimination against women and girls everywhere. To eliminate the violence against women and girls in public and private spheres, which means recognition of domestic violence laws in every country, elimination of harmful practices like child marriage, for example, recognition and value of unpaid work and domestic work of women, ensure women's full and effective participation in leadership in every level, not just political, ensure universal access to the sexual and reproductive health and reproductive rights, understand reform to give women equal rights to economic resources, access to resources like land rights, like inheritance rights, ownership, technology, use of technology for women and girls to not be discriminated against, and adaptation of the policies and legislation that promote gender equality and empowerment of women and girls at every level. So that was a lot of work. Not all of that looked that glamorous of talking to UN about this. Most of it was negotiating in the basement with cold pizza in New York at the UN. But I thought you would all appreciate the orange. So I thought I'll pull that image up. So why do we need Sustainable Development Goals? Why do we need to even talk about women's rights? 49 countries do not have laws protecting women during domestic violence situation, which means you have no right to call police and saying, my partner is abusing me, do something about it. Okay? If it happens at your home, there is no protection for you. 39 countries do not have equal inheritance rights for daughters and sons. So if you have a son, you're more likely to inherit, and as a daughter, you don't. In 87 countries, 1 in 5 women have experienced sexual violence in the last 12 months. I want you just to sit with that. Yeah, 1 in 5 women. In some statistics, it says 1 in 3 in a lifetime will experience sexual violence. Yeah. Harmful practices as such as child marriage, still about 15 million girls under the age of 18 every year. Okay? Every single year, 15 million girls are taken out of school to get married in the age of 12 to 17 years old. Yeah, that's why we need this type of work. Yeah, women do 2.6 times of more unpaid and domestic work than men. Like, how many times you guys do dishes? Yeah, we are counting that. That's 2.6 times, which means I have minus 2.6 times time to invest in my other work. Yeah, sexual and reproductive rights are critical, and they should be critical in their own right, not because of something else. 52% of women married or in a union with somebody, they do not have a decision-making power over their own bodies. They cannot decide for themselves whether they want to have a child, when they want to have the child, how many children they want to have. This statistic also doesn't mention one other aspect, is gender-selective abortions. In a lot of countries, people are trying to get rid of girls and not have as many girls as boys, and they do the abortion once they realize that there is a girl. Yeah. While more women entered politics than before, there's only 23% of world leaders are women. So that's kind of why. And I like this image very much. It really kind of gives you an idea, right? Like, okay, you have the same start and they have the same finish. And everything in between is really a lot of different road to take. Yeah? What is common in these 7 countries? And those students who were in lunch with me this afternoon, please don't say you know the answer. Tonga, Iran, Sudan, South Sudan, Somalia, United States, and Palau. What's common? Anything? You'll be surprised. Oh, you have an answer, yes.
They didn't sign the Declaration of Rights.
Correct. Convention for...
Dr. Rimmel.
Perfect, thank you. They have not signed Convention for Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. And I want you to really process that as Americans, right? When we always say the US is, progressive and it gets out there in the world to support other countries, to get democracy, it has not signed the Convention on the Rights of Women. What's common among these 3 countries? Yeah, you figured it's probably within the same theme. They have not signed the Convention on the Right of a Child. You had it. The United States have not signed the International Convention on the Right of Children. And it has some of the most regressive laws on child. You would be shocked. It's one of the only countries in the world that actually imprisons a child under the age of 18 for life without parole. Okay? If I wouldn't tell you that's US, you would think it's somewhere else. There's a lot of things the US does not have in terms of protections of the rights. It also hasn't signed the Declaration on Disability. So International Convention on Disability, same countries. So the reason I'm bringing that up is just to debunk the myth of where solutions are happening and where a lot of the progressive activism is happening, because there's a lot of work to be done here. and some of the international laws that we are using are not applicable here. So we cannot send an international committee of monitor people. I'm part of that for some countries. We cannot come here to the US and do the monitoring and reporting on violations. Let's talk about the F word. I'll bring it up before someone else does. Who knows this image? Why are you ashamed to say it? Who knows this image? That is Beyonce, if you did not recognize the silhouette. That's a Beyonce a couple of years ago. She projected that during her concert, and internet went crazy. Social media just went crazy. What do you mean Beyonce is feminist? It's the same when she was performing at the halftime show when they're like, what do you mean Beyonce is black? But I want to talk to you about different kind of feminism, not Beyonce kind of feminism, which I also respect and follow. I want to talk to you about the political feminism. This image comes from an announcement that Canadian government did last year to announce their feminist foreign policy. How many countries do you think have feminist foreign policy? 2. There's only 2 right now, explicitly calling it feminist. If you're looking at actually what some of the countries doing, it is feminist without being named that. But 2 countries in the world that actually proclaim that they have feminist foreign policy. One of them is Canada, another is Sweden. What makes their foreign policy feminist? I want to also debunk the fear of feminism, because I know there is some. So the Swedish policy consists of 3 R's: rights, representation, resources. Yeah? They believe that promotion of women's issues, including by countering gender-based violence and discrimination, is really important everywhere in the world, starting from home. They are making sure that all of the rights that they are providing to women in Sweden are the ones promoted elsewhere. Representation, which means the participation of women in all decision-making spaces, from parliament to private sectors and boards of the private sector and legal system. And 3, resources, which is very important, and that's the work that research that Jamie referred to, Where is the Money for Women's Rights, has contributed to really advocate if you're pay for what you're saying you want to see, right? It is providing the resources and ensuring there's equitable allocation of the resources for gender programs and gender budgeting. So it's not we just talking about it's important to support women and girls, we're actually putting the money out there. If you take the word feminist out of this, anything makes this policy sound radical and weird to you? Yeah? So maybe it's just a word we're scared of. What about Canada? They have 6 action areas. One core action area is gender equality and empowerment of women and girls. That's an overarching. Another one is human dignity, growth that works for everyone, environment and climate action, inclusive governance, and peace and security. Within each of this section, they are making sure that women are not represented, they are a voice. They are the ones dictating what's going to happen, how it's going to happen, and what the priorities are. It is not only about diversity and inclusion, it's about creating space and walking out and saying, okay, now you tell us, what do you want? Anything scary in this policy? Or any questions so far? I can pause. How are y'all doing? Yeah? Okay. So what do some feminist policies look domestically or nationally? One that I find really fascinating, that it is not a hate crime everywhere, but in Nottinghamshire in England, catcalling is a hate crime. If you woo a woman on the street, you can be charged with hate crime. Compliments are different from catcalling. Isn't that fascinating? Sweden requires 16 months of paid parental leave per country, or per family, sorry. There are only 2 countries in the world that do not have paid parental leave. Which ones are they?
US.
And Papua New Guinea. Yes, US and Papua New Guinea. US considers pregnancy disability. You can get 6 weeks unpaid, well, half-paid disability leave. French advertisers must be transparent when they use Photoshop for the bodies. So if they took a photo of me and they're putting it in a magazine, they cannot patch it up and make it prettier than it is. They have to tell the person before they do that. That's illegal. Norway requires companies that they have at least 40% of women on the board. As a country, you cannot register as a company in Norway if you do not have 40% women. London made this illegal. You will not see advertisement like this in London because that's body shaming. Any body is a beach body. And in London, they do not allow that. So those are the feminist policies. Can we all live with those? Yeah, we good? So what are the key women's rights issues? Second part of my presentation. Who knows who that is? All right. Send you to library tomorrow. It is Audre Lorde, a phenomenal activist and poet. And she said there is no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live a single issue life. And the reason I bring it up because I really want to move us away from thinking, oh, that's a women's issue. Oh, that's black people's issue. Oh, that's gay issue. There is no such thing. We are all interconnected, and all of the issues that we are living are interconnected. So this is a perspective that the movement I'm part of is using in when we're addressing anything and any type of issues. So what are the women's rights issues? Climate is the women's rights issue. Yeah. Political discourse and leadership that we have is a women's rights issue. Access to good education, not just any education, public, good, affordable, safe, progressive education is something that is good for everyone in the world. Peace, security, and conflict resolution is a women's rights issue. Economic rights, and I'm not talking about economic empowerment or give a girl a grant and then she'll save the world. It is about rights. Gender-based violence is quite specific for women. Statistics I used earlier is very chilling around the violence that happens against women and girls in comparison to other populations. And resources distribution is a women's rights issue. Women are paid less. I find it sarcastic. I'm speaking to you today on the Equal Pay Day. And those of you who don't know what that is, it is actually, if you started working in the beginning of 2018, right now, by today, you made as much money as a woman as men made by the end of 2018. So it took another 3 months to catch up on the pay, yeah? So all of those issues, I'm sorry, am I depressing anybody?
Leslie just said her department is even less.
Yeah. But the good news, there are a lot of people working to try to make a change in that. And what do we do when we work on it? So I kind of decided to do this playful attack response thing. That's what we do in my movement. So there's a lot of backlash against civil society overall in the world. Over 50 governments have adopted the law in the last 5 years that is making work of nonprofit organizations that receive funding from outside illegal. Those organizations are named foreign agents. If you receive a fund from Soros Foundation, USAID, any other source, Ford, anyone else, you can be claimed being a foreign agent in Russia, in Egypt, and a number of other countries. What that means that a lot of organizations had to either shut down or find other ways to mobilize resources. That's also part of my work I do. I work with a lot of organizations to find the ways to mobilize resources in alternative ways. So how do we respond to this is reorganizing. So a lot of groups stop being NGOs and becoming social enterprises or doing work in different configurations so they don't have to have a registration as an NGO. There's collaborative strategizing that groups come together, and then if the groups are in Egypt working with the groups in, let's say, Morocco, and they can come across to each other and bring money in bra back to do some work. We've done that in the Balkans during the war and post-war, and now the strategy is coming back. We're mobilizing with funders, so I do the work around convening activists and funders in some neutral territories, spaces where they can talk honestly about what's happening and what kind of funding they need and how can we make the funding available for them. And the funders are coming to those spaces really ready to listen and to be so strategize with activists. Another attack I already mentioned earlier, the efforts to restrict women's control over our own bodies, of how the laws are restricting us in different ways. What we have been able to do is changing policies. 2018, we actually saw some success cases in Ireland, Chile, and Argentina, which had really terrible laws on women's access to reproductive health. They have changed those laws, and there's been a lot of advocacy over the years to do that. There is a lot of monitoring and reporting of violations for women access to reproductive services, and also monitoring and evaluating of how much it actually costs to not provide it. How much does it cost to have the country not have good laws that are protecting women's bodily autonomy? And there are really creative fundraising strategies, one of which I don't know how many of you know, when the Planned Parenthood here had got the cutting from their budget from the federal government. They had this fun fundraising campaign, send us some money in the name of Mike Pence. And so Mike Pence was receiving a lot of thank you notes at his mail post office, because a lot of people were thanking him for donating. So they actually raised more money than the federal government was giving them through that campaign, and he got a lot of notes. So we also trying to have fun with it, because it's hard, right? If you're living your entire life and you're trying to just protect your own body from being violated, protect everything that you're doing, and then you have that running situation that you saw earlier with the picture, we really can get depressed and very angry. So we're trying to kind of spice it up a little bit with doing some fun. The climate change, I already mentioned, is a women's rights issue. So in denial of how it's affecting people, especially women and girls, it's been really challenging and very difficult to see. And in a lot of communities that are underprivileged and have been historically excluded and exploited are the first ones to actually feel the results of the climate change. So what the movements have been doing is, this is one of those struggles that has seen a lot of collaborative cross-movement organizing, what Audre Lorde is talking about. We have all come together and we talked about what it is that we all can learn from one another, what our struggles look like. We have been learning from the elders and indigenous leaders. This is one of those struggles that actually brought together the spaces where the indigenous people's wisdoms of how they have been able to protect the land for this long before we all showed up. You know, how we can go back to that or learn from that. And most importantly, this is led by the youth, right? While we're listening to the elders, the youth are the ones leading us, and they're saying, you're going to leave us such a messy place. Please listen to us. And we really need a shift in how this is happening. Another attack, and this is more of a political discourse that we are currently living and experiencing, is around divide, control, and exploit, right? The fear of the other. How do we make sure we organize against the other? And the political leadership in so many countries is very nationalistic and very secluded. And so the way we're responding to it is actually reversing that model to connect, relate, and belong. We do not allow people, the leaders, to divide us. We do not allow them to control and exploit us. We are actually going across the border and talking to each other. And that's nothing new, actually. I've been talking to some of you about the work I've done in Balkans and also in Caucasus, where there's a lot of hatred against one another that is being uplifted by the governments, by brainwashing of the people that, you know, Armenians have to hate Azeris and Turks, and in the Balkans, you know, the Kosovars and Albanians should be hating Serbs. And then you have social justice movements, not only feminists, but others as well, coming at the same table and saying, not in our name. And the same is happening in Middle East as well. They're coming together and saying, not in our name, we are going to work across these lines, and we are going to make sure that we are looking at our humanity and what the solutions can be that are not about dividing and controlling and exploiting. Political control wars, I'm naming it. So where we are seeing this kind of continuous pendulum shifting in the last few years of the control of very powerful, very conservative parties, and then some of the progressive parties coming in, and it just kind of goes back and forth. And if you look at the progressive ones, oftentimes they are by indigenous or people of color, and a lot of women in those parties. So there's a keeps on shifting, right? And so what we're seeing as a response is that we're organizing and making sure more women are entering politics in unprecedented numbers, and most importantly, doing politics differently. And I'll show you a couple of images that I'm sure you would agree with. Not coming in with the same, okay, I just need to be the strongman version in a skirt. Oftentimes not even the skirt, because they would say something wrong about it. But definitely like embracing a different type of leadership. Women as weapons of war and excluded from negotiation tables for peace. That's an ongoing strategy. This is nothing new. Rape as a weapon of war has been used for as long as we know the war has been existing. But we do know that the women are organizing with sisters across the different divides, and especially when we're talking with such an increase of refugees all over the world. There is a lot of organizing happening with the activists who are formerly refugees coming into the camps and working with people. And there's a demand and presence at international levels. There is a UN resolution 1325, which US also did not ratify. It's all about what are the women's representation is in post-conflict resolutions. And so that's kind of a few. There are quite a few more attacks on us, but I think that would be enough. So you all probably have seen this image, right? This is the freshman class or freshwoman class of the Congress in the US. A very new generation of people coming in, and it will be very interesting to see what they do with politics and how they shift it. You guys know this person, right? Yes, Prime Minister of New Zealand, and last year she got really kind of got a lot of press because she was the first sitting high-level politician to have a child while in the office, and her partner kept coming to all of this parliament hearing with the baby, just pass the baby on for feeding and taking baby back. And this year she became famous because of her very, very different response to the terrorist attack in New Zealand, and how much compassion she demonstrated to the victims, and how she stood really strongly against the attack, which was very different from a lot of other leaders in the world, and it really demonstrated that it can be done differently. And we also have seen some of the other women with a very different politics from before elected in the last few months. In terms of the word leadership, so Rwanda is actually number one in the number of women in the parliament. US is 96. And that statistics, you know, we can kind of go back and forth of like, is it important just the numbers of women, or are they really changing the politics? But Rwanda has been a very interesting example and a case study that people have done to see that actually, yes, there is a big difference. By the amount of people that you actually have in the government who are representing your own community, your own society, there is a big difference in what kind of policies get accepted, what kind of political atmosphere and frameworks are created. I could not emphasize enough the power of young feminists and young leaders who are coming up. I was very privileged to be part of creation of FRIDA, the Young Feminist Fund, back when I was young. And I did step out of it as soon as I turned 35, because the idea in creation of FRIDA was that it will be led by young women, and the young people will be deciding themselves where the money goes, how they're raising. I'm still helping them raise money whenever they need me. They actually almost never call anymore. But it's really believing that the people of their own generation can actually do the change. And the technology is making a really, really huge shift. I live in the belly of the beast in Silicon Valley, where I do see how much technology can do good and bad at the same time. So having the girls' representation in technologies and leading these conversations and the work around it is very important. Changing the narratives and changing the how we are relating to one another, and instead of having this kind of poverty porn, as I call it, from other parts of the world, really seeing that people from different parts of the world have very powerful stories and powerful solutions for their own complex problems. So how do we step into those conversations and do that? And that's probably my last image. Don't agonize, organize, and organize collectively with different type of people. This is the big lesson that I have learned in 17 years of doing this professionally, that my solutions are only as good as the community I'm working with, as the diversity of people I'm part of. And you'll probably remember this iconic image, I can do it. Yeah, like this woman. So there's a new one that a friend of mine actually has done this. We all can do it, and it's a diversity of voices and all coming together as equals to the conversation, and knowing when you can step in and step out of the conversation to make sure the agenda is moving forward. That's it. I think I talked too long, eh?
No.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
We're just so proud of you, and you do such great
I
work.
think I have this.
I want to open the floor now to anyone who has questions for Angelika. I want to start.
Okay.
You said the United States was one of the few countries that didn't ratify the, what was the first one?
Convention of
Yeah.
Elimination of Rights of Women.
So I think in fairness and transparency, what was the excuse that the U.S. gave? I'm sure it wasn't as
Yes.
stuff like we hate women. I mean, there had to be sort of a logical.
Yes.
What was the reason?
Well, the logical according to. It's interesting because actually U.S. was the one to propose it, but it was proposing it in order to have some international instrument to them to refer to when they wanted to enter some country. Yeah, but internally they say they don't need it because their laws have already responded to a lot of those things.
So we're already there.
Yeah, we
done.
already
don't
there.
have problems,
Yes.
so we don't need to sign
Yes.
it. It's for you guys so that we can hold it
Yes,
as a
we already have
stick,
progressive
right?
laws. And this is why I keep bringing up there on numerous occasions that actually been hand-in-hand comparisons of the U.S. laws and how they discriminate and the requirements of the CEDA and how it doesn't match up.
All right. Questions? Rodrigo.
Hi. So first of all, congratulations. I'm an alumni as well from the school, so seeing you doing what you do, it's an inspiration, so congratulations for that. My question is, I'm trying to understand, when was the point when society decided that women were weaker, that they deserve less? We should really go back in history.
Really go back.
And when did that started and why? Because I'm pretty sure that you have
Yeah.
more knowledge about this.
Yeah. Do you want to collect a couple of more questions before I address, or you want me to do one at a time?
You might want to restate the question with the mic.
Did everybody get Rodrigo's question? He asked a very global question, which is, when did we as a human race realize that, or decide was the word you used, that women were actually weaker than men? How far back do you have to go to see this? There's probably a lot of women in the room that could answer that question, but we'll let Angelika answer.
Yeah, I'd love to have this as well. Actually, it's still, there are not every society that has agreed on that. There are modern societies that do believe that women are as strong or stronger than men, and there are matriarchies, right? So unfortunately, the leading political and dominant framework under which we are living is patriarchy, where, you know, men decided that at some point, you're right, that they should control the situation. I had this, I have an 11-year-old kid, and I was talking to the 11-year-olds about this on March 8th, which is International Women's Rights. And one of the 11-year-olds had a brilliant answer to this question and said, I think it's just a fluke of nature. It was like a few men just were born a little stronger than women for a while. And then somebody decided, well, because you're stronger, you're going to do this. And because you're weaker, you're going to do this. And then they just kind of got stuck with that. And I think to an extent, like, I kind of like his answer, because it actually doesn't have much rationale to it, other than that. But at the same time, so if you even look at this particular continent where we are at, we are standing on indigenous land, right? Before Europeans showed up here, the indigenous tribes here had 5 genders, right? And they had a very fluid definition of what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, and what it means to be whatever other gender that they had within the scope. And the spectrum of masculinities has been so much bigger than it is now. So it's actually been narrowing down further and further, and very closely associated with the rise of Christianity and the very first story that Christianity kind of presents for itself. But then also some of the other religions picked up, but not all. So if you look at Hinduism and Buddhism, it's not structured on that. And so you actually there is so much more nuance to how patriarchy has been able to demonstrate itself. But hopefully it will be changing more.
Great question, yeah. Kara?
Going back to the few aid organizations that you displayed earlier on, like World Bank, USAID, can you talk about how much percentage-wise or roundabout is the funding solely dedicated to gender equality?
Oh, I wish I had that slide. I have it in my research. 0.6%. I know exactly. It's very, very little. And it is definitely, especially so that 0.6% is for women's rights organizations on the ground doing the work. There's a tiny bit more that goes to this administrative institutions and government to government. So for example, Egyptian organizations cannot receive money to do work in Egypt, but the Egyptian government gets money from the US, and oftentimes it gets earmarked for gender budgeting. You know, but it's gender budgeting, whatever the Ministry of Finance in Egypt would decide, that would be distributed to.
Did you have a question?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really impressed with how I noticed that you talk about the power that women have and connecting people with resources, and you don't talk a lot about going to empower people or to provide lots of assistance and help, and that's I think that's a really important takeaway. Well, it is a really important takeaway for me, and I'm just wondering if in all of your experience, did you always approach your work that way, or was it a learning trajectory?
It's a good question, Jennifer. Good to have you here. That's another alum. I've always believed people have power. I don't need to come and empower them. And I had this phenomenal mentor when I first started doing this work. Her name is Srilata Batliwala from Bangalore, India, who wrote this fantastic article back in the 80s, I think, Taking Power Out of Empowerment, where international organizations come in and say, we are going to give you leadership training and teach you how to fish. And that was very much taking power out of the women who are sitting around the room, because oftentimes those trainings were not coming in with, what have you been doing before we showed up? How have you been living and surviving, and what are your issues, and how do you want to actually improve your own lives? And there's great stories about this, you know, from Afghanistan, where the US will come in and build this pumps for the water in villages, and then the next day they will get blown up. And they couldn't understand what's happening, why they keep being blown up, and they thought it's men in the community that are doing that. And then they learned actually it's women who are doing this. They don't want water in the village. It's the only time they can get away from men. They really wanted to go to the river and get the water, because that's the only time they could just do their own stuff. Nobody asked them. So I grew up, let's say, in the movement through those frameworks. It is not about, you know, like, oh, you're living in this conditions that are terrible, we're going to improve them. No, no, no. Ask, first of all, do I want them to be improved? How I want them to be improved? Because if I'm living with a problem, I probably may have some solutions, ideas as well.
Let me go to Pedram first. Yeah.
Thank you so much for very broad talk. My question is more academic. As versus you, I mean, who did training in academia and went to the field. What's your solution to create applied feminism in academia? How we can transfer your experience to the curriculum for our students to understand not only what's feminism, but how we can apply your experience for our students in shape of courses or apply.
I think you just answered my search for what kind of PhD I should do. Because I've been thinking about it for a while. But this is an excellent question. And there are actually quite a few academics that are working on this course between academia and activism. Majority of them, unfortunately, I know only the ones in California and some in Chicago. And they have been doing really fantastic work around connecting the students with the activists who are doing this type of work, and then doing some of the academic research and then pairing that up. So there's definitely something is already out there. On that, but I'd love to be part of kind of creating more of that. There is a fantastic stuff coming from South Africa University actually on that. The professor who started the Department on Gender Studies in South African University is now heading UC Davis Gender Studies Department, and she's doing this fantastic work around activism and academia in Africa, bringing it to the US and changing this whole discourse of how Africans are perceived in the US and blowing people's socks off when they start talking academically about feminism. I don't know if I directly answered your question, but I could point you to the people who already been doing that. I personally haven't touched that yet, but would love to get involved.
We'll send you an intern.
Oh, okay.
Yeah? Yes, Carmen?
How does a master in global studies help you to build your career as a socialist?
Yeah, as a socialist. I like that, how you, yeah, the activist, yes. I think I was talking to some of you guys earlier today, the students at the lunch, that I did find some of the studying here a little challenging because of how progressive I am. So some of the classes that I was taking, I found them politically and economically very narrow in terms of what the possibilities are, and how very Western perspective of what economics are and what politics are. Jennifer would remember my heated debates with one of our professors on neoliberal theory. But I think that it helped me a lot to really understand different side. So now living in San Francisco, I'm really able to have a very different perspective on what middle of America is like, what is the conservative thinking around politics are, and how to work with it. Not to like just oppose it all the time, but understand where it's coming from. What are the baselines for it? And I do see transformations. I do see that we actually can learn from one another and find something. I learned a lot here. And it definitely helped me to understand what are those different frameworks and how they're applicable for different populations based on exposure, right? For a lot of times, it's actually the exposure of people to different theories and different practical applications of them that then just opens the mind up, right? And so if you're just kind of growing up with one, it's harder. So what I found is really helpful for me is studying here, and then I got a job with the Global Fund for Women, which is the large foundation, and I was entrusted $1.5 million a year to give away in 40 countries. And I was a 26-year-old kid. Well, 26-year-olds are not kids. I should not be saying that, sorry. I was a 26-year-old woman with a lot of money and a lot of power. And it actually also helped me to understand how my positionality in my country even changed. When I was coming back home and around my region, I was perceived differently because now I was coming with a big pocket and the title of a big foundation from the US. And so that was also very big learning for me to understand, power. It's very interesting how people perceive power when you have it. And then I made a decision to leave that because it was too much for me. I didn't want to engage with that anymore. I went into the NGO, and suddenly overnight I wasn't as handsome and as attractive to a lot of people because I didn't have that power anymore. So I think different type of experiences are very important, and the school here definitely set up certain fertile ground for that for me.
Anybody else?
Danny was here.
Oh, Danny had one. I'm sorry, Dr.
Yeah.
Shipka.
Just a general question. Knowing all that you've done and now that you know that your entire lifetime, are you optimistic about the next 10 years?
I'm glad you're asking me now, not last year when I went through a depression. I am. I am very optimistic for the next 10 years because I also see a big shift in the generation of boys that we're bringing up. And that's, we didn't talk about that much, but I do believe that just like there's no single issue solution problem, we cannot address the issues of the gender injustice just working with women. And so I actually am surprised with my own language used today. I usually don't say 1 in 3 women are raped. I'm saying 1 in 3 men rape. So it's actually putting the honors the other way around. And how do we bring up a different generation and different type of boys? And going back to your question, like I talk to my kid about the spectrum of masculinities that are part of choosing he can do. It doesn't have to be this macho, toxic expression, and that's not the only way to be a man. It's actually, I don't know that many men who enjoy being that. There's so many other versions of it, and how do we put it out there and making sure that it is very much embraced by the next generation. And I'm seeing the change all over the world that the younger generation, and on the climate, you can see there's so much work being done by the 17 years old and on gun control in this country. So I do think that things will improve.
Yes, thank you so much. Great.
Yeah.
And thank you so
Thank you.